Hi, this is Seb's Talks. I'm having informal discussions with rising talent in the multi-asset division. We're talking about culture, research, and experience. So real-world applications of the research. Luisa, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Good. Not too nervous? We can
Just
shake
a little
off
bit.
the high five helps usually. Here we go. So let's start with some basic questions. If you don't mind giving us a little bit of your background.
Well, I grew up in Russia. I went to college in Bulgaria, and then I went to grad school in Louisiana. Tiro is my first official job.
And how you like it so far?
Fantastic.
Okay, so I have some icebreaker questions as well. Are you ready?
Oh yeah,
Favorite movie?
The Matrix.
Oh, me too. Did you know it was my favorite movie too?
I did, but I had it long before.
But they're not all equally good. Some of them are
No.
better. The first one in my mind was the best one.
I agree.
Favorite music?
All genres of metal.
Oh, really?
Yes,
See, I did not expect that one. I'm a huge Metallica fan, by the way. You like Metallica?
of course.
Oh, good. Okay, let's talk about research. And I'd like to just discuss your educational milestones. You lived in different locations. You've kind of, in at least three different places through your education. Do you want to walk us through your background in terms of educational milestones?
Yes. When I was in high school, I specialized in languages and literature. Russian language, Russian literature, English. That's what drove me to study abroad in Bulgaria.
So I'm curious about this. So this was a high school in Russia.
Yes.
And were you allowed to specialize at that level, at the high school level, or it was just because those were your interests?
Those were my interests, and
Okay.
I had a great fortune of a fantastic teacher
Got
who was willing to take it an extra mile. That inspired me to study in Bulgaria. It was American University in Bulgaria. It is called. It is sometimes described as Harvard of the Balkans. It is an amazing place, incredibly international, with students from all over, all Soviet countries, ex-Soviet countries.
And is it in English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to go. And there I studied business administration and finance. I didn't know I would circle back eventually to do that, because at that point I got very interested in applied microeconomics, and I pursued that passion for my graduate studies in Louisiana. So it was Bulgaria and US.
Tell us about your graduate studies in Louisiana.
My chosen field is young and makes for great dinner conversations. It is cultural economics.
Okay.
It studies how people's beliefs and attitudes affect economic phenomena. So things like gender norms, attitudes towards labor force participation, etc. Religion.
That's really so. And do you also look at comparisons between countries and cultural norms across countries, and then how that drives economic outcomes?
Yeah.
You had to write a thesis for your PhD.
I did.
Tell us about that. How was the experience?
It was good. The topic was effect of education on religiosity and people's how much they engage in their spiritual lives for different denominations. And then the second chapter of my thesis was the impact of gender norms on labor force participation for
Okay.
immigrants.
Okay.
It was a long time ago.
Well, it's interesting. So you look at gender and immigration and the labor market, and what was the takeaway?
The takeaway was that it matters a lot for women. That for them, if parents tell them that it is good to be employed versus not, that can impact how daughters choose how many hours to work, whether or not to work at all. And the impact was significant because at some point we compared it to the income of taxes people face and incentives on that end. And the impact was comparable, which was interesting to see.
And, in our business, quantitative skills are really important.
Yes, they are.
But we have people from all different fields where there is a quantitative component. For example, in the quantitative research groups, people from mathematics, people from computer sciences, people from finance and economics. And what's interesting is that they all find applications of what they've learned in their PhD program that are relevant to the day-to-day work of finance. Can you tell us, are you using today things you learned in your PhD, whether in terms of methodologies or sometimes it's just a discipline of research that's applicable to the real world, right?
Yeah, that is definitely used every day. I'd say 2, 3 things. So the topic of my thesis, of course, has nothing to do with what I do day to day. But there are many skills that are transferable. One is I fell in love with econometrics in grad school. It is part of data science, and I knew I wanted to be a data scientist for the rest of my career, whether it's in academia or in industry. So I use that for sure. And then my experience with working with survey data, individual level data, actually came in really handy because that gives us an extra data source to better model how individuals spend, save, how much they earn, etc. I use that quite a bit.
Right, really interesting. So then at one point, like every PhD student, you have to decide whether you go into academia and whether you want to teach or whether you want to go into industry. Tell us about how you made that choice. Was it difficult? And what drove your decision to go into industry?
Like I said, in grad school, I fell in love with methods, with tools that we use, just the statistics of it. And I loved working with data because theoretical models are fun, but testing them against real life phenomena is what I enjoy the most. At the same time, I love teaching, so I was open to both fields. I'm very happy where I ended up.
Okay, so maybe you can still teach part-time.
I always could.
So let's talk about what you like the most about doing a PhD, and then we'll talk about work and how things are going in the work of doing quantitative research. But let's talk about was it if a young person asked you, should I pursue a PhD, what would you tell them, and how would you sell them? Would you sell them?
I hope my former advisor will not.
He won't watch this.
Not as young as I was.
Right.
I wasn't even 21. I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I needed to build up more skills in terms of engaging, networking, working with people, knowing what I want, to be responsible for my own research agenda. That's good to know. It worked out, and it can still work out, but I think folks would benefit the most if they kind of know what they want their PhD for.
Yes, and traditionally a PhD is to teach. But our industry has been a magnet for talent. And when I don't have a PhD, but I've worked with a lot of people that have PhDs. And what I realized early on is the discipline is remarkable, because you can't get through it if you don't have the discipline and to a certain extent the self-discipline, which is very transferable to industry. So that's why our industry has attracted a lot of PhD level talent. Now, so let's talk about work. How did you learn about T. Rowe Price?
Karen Robinson, a fantastic recruiter from T. Rowe, reached out to me to ask if I would be interested in investment fellowship program. I was not interested in finance at all because of how competitive it is usually portrayed. That gave me some reservations, but I spent a full day interviewing and it was so much fun. It was inspirational. Jim, my boss, he told me, I came in, I had no idea what 401k plans are, and then I heard about it and I learned about plan participants, 401k plans, target date investment strategies, and I came back from that day of interviews and I read every paper on retirement spending I could find because it was inspirational.
And an opportunity to use econometrics, right?
It was.
And survey data, all skills that you already had.
Yeah, it clicked that way. I also had a chance to learn a lot because of that rotational program.
So that was the interview. And a lot of companies will present really well when we interview people.
Yes, you
did. And we'll all say, oh, we have a great culture here, it's fantastic. But you've been here for a while now. Tell us your thoughts now that you've been here, and
Mhm.
whether you have second thoughts about teaching, maybe, or how does it feel once you've been in role for a while?
Fair. And people talk about culture, but people who sat across from me, they also stayed with the company for many years, 10, 15 years, and that also sold it, because people can tell you, but the actions speak for themselves. That was
Right.
really nice. I've been with Tiro for 7 years. I love it. I do not have second thoughts or any regrets on joining. I think there are a lot of opportunities within the company to grow. It is a very encouraging environment where people support you. I can be ambitious without necessarily burning out, so it's great.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the research itself. You sort of hinted at it. I'm familiar with what you're working on, but tell us, broadly speaking, what projects you're working on.
Most of my time is spent on modeling participants' demographics, how plan participants behave, how they, what their earnings trajectories look like, what their savings trajectories look like, how they might spend in retirement, what kind of benefits they might expect to receive from social security, pension systems, etc. I model employer match and plan characteristics as well. And then we multiplied times 3 or 2 or 4 to create it for all other countries, not just the US.
Right, that's interesting. But so to simplify, most people in America, when they take a job, they contribute to a pension
Yes.
system, which is defined contribution. It's a 401k, and part of your paycheck goes to that program. You have the ability to decide how you allocate it. But if you don't, there's something called a default investment, which is part of your
Yes.
paycheck goes to saving for retirement, and your employer will put you in a default if you don't actually make a choice. So would you like to talk a little bit about that process, how it works?
I will tell you, defaults are important.
Because most people, when they save for retirement in the DC, defined contribution system, don't necessarily engage with the process.
Right. It's default contribution rates act as a great anchor point.
Right.
We can say that people take them as implicit advice, but also there's this cost, there's this effort to change it. And
Right.
like you say, most individuals don't engage, don't do that.
So let's talk a little bit more about your research on how people save for retirement. You have access to this awesome proprietary data of, I think we have 2 million different plan participants, so people who are saving for retirement inside their 401k. There's a lot of interesting research you can do around that. What are you looking at these days?
You are right. It is a fantastic data set from our record-keeping platform. Like you said, 2 million participants. We use that data to model how they save, so that we can simulate them from age 25 to the point that they retire. I think the latest innovation would be Gaussian process regression is one way to fit a really fancy technique to that. The other one would be multinomial logit models.
So you use these models to predict the savings rates of a typical participant, or to model how the cohort of participants are likely to behave and save?
To model a distribution. So
Right.
I create 10,000 simulated participants, artificial people.
Right.
They start saving at certain rates, and
Right.
then I model the trajectories of their savings. So someone might start saving 4%, then 5%, then increase it to 7%, then drop it, etc.
And what's really cool is you have all the data on 2 million actual participants, so you can calibrate the model to be super realistic.
That is, yes. That is
And then we simulate capital markets as well. We have these Monte Carlo projections, these scenarios for capital markets. You combine that with the scenarios or the participant behavior, we call it, and you get a really interesting set of simulations, right? So how do we then use the simulations?
We test our target date strategies and our retirement income strategies.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
I sometimes describe Monte Carlo engines as a sandbox. It's a somewhat naive way, but it's a testing environment, like a lab. We choose to pursue a certain strategy, a certain allocation of bonds versus stocks, or a certain way to withdraw money from a portfolio in retirement, and we see how it performs across 10,000 or more scenarios. And those scenarios differ not just in their economic outcomes, asset returns, inflation, real GDP growth, all of that is in our models, but they also differ in participant behavior paths.
Right.
So some people in those 10,000 will save a lot, some not, some will be high earners, some not. And we want to pick a strategy that would serve all of them in the best way possible,
right,
because there are many different participants in a plan.
Right, that's fascinating. And we've also done research, I don't know if you were involved, on the outcomes, right? So for some participants, they get a target date strategies as the default, a target date strategy. Others will decide to do it themselves, and they might be trading between different funds and the different strategies in their account. And I believe we've done research where we look at the outcomes for people who trade themselves and compare that to people who are invested in a target date strategy. And then I think we found that they're allocated typically differently and that the outcomes tend to be different. Tell us what you found most surprising about participant behavior. When you look at all these data, what have you learned about how people save, about how they behave during financial crises, about how they react to market uncertainty? Any learnings that you think are interesting from this data?
Since we're talking about participant savings behavior, I was reassured by how sticky participants in target date funds are with their savings.
Right.
It is something that came up a lot during COVID, where there was a lot of market turmoil. We expected individuals to start pulling out money, but they didn't. The fact that it is such a well-oiled machine and people trust it, and they keep saving the way they've been saving, be it auto deferral contribution rates, be it the rates they contributed at before, that they continue through with it.
Stay the course.
Stay the course, yes.
Right. And I think that was part of the research, was that those participants that are in target date strategies tend to stay the course, especially because a lot of them were defaulted into it, so they're not really engaged with the process to begin with, versus those that decide to do it themselves, to trade their own accounts, tend to sell at the bottom, which is usually not a good time to sell in financial markets. Louisa, any other things you'd like to mention, other aspects of your research that you think people might find interesting?
You asked me what was surprising. The other thing that surprised me is the breadth of participants on our platform. When I look at their earnings, at how differently they save, contribute to different types of accounts, there's so much heterogeneity there. We spend a lot of time modeling a lot of nuances, and I believe it's important because we want to capture the entire population. Right,
got it. Tell us, if you had advice to give to someone, so you've been at T. Rowe Price for 7 years, if you had advice to give to someone who's just finishing their graduate studies, what would you tell them about the industry and research, especially in quantitative methods?
I would tell them to explore. Be open to new techniques. Some of them will be based on data and will be purely descriptive and statistical, something we all learn pretty early on. But other methods I've learned are all about modeling, fitting distributions, fitting models, creating good Monte Carlo modules to simulate. That was new to me, and I think it's important to keep building that base of skills.
So keep an open mind.
Absolutely.
Right. You're entering the job market with a set of skills. Some of those will be directly useful. Others will be indirectly useful in that, for example, the work ethic and the discipline and the research methods, they're going to be applicable to anything. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is to be curious and not dogmatic.
Always be curious.
Yeah, and not dogmatic about, I've learned to do this way in the econometrics of financial markets or whatever technique you've learned. it has to be the same way that I apply it on the job. It's not always the case, right?
No, and there's a lot of wisdom that goes into it. We fit models, but then we look at the outcomes and take a really good look at the outcomes.
Yeah, makes sense. Louisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.